John, happy Friday. Thank you for coming on today.
Happy Friday, Reed. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm glad to finally have gotten you on. I know we've certainly had some interactions with the online community for a few years now, so it's nice to get you on onto one of the live streams.
Yeah, this is exciting. The topic I love talking about testing, so any chance.
Yeah. Well, and certainly I think with the some of the new features that we've had with Power BI and Fabric in the last few years, it's making it easier and easier to do a lot of testing and even automated testing with just native features, not having to use too many non out of the box solutions, which has been very helpful.
Yeah, that's for sure. Especially it's once it's in the product, it's a lot easier to
Mhm.
get people spun up on testing.
Exactly. And as this is your first time onto the channel, if you wouldn't mind maybe introducing yourself, give a little background about who you are, and we can kind of start from there.
Yeah, sounds good. So, John Kerski, I work a lot in federal consulting. I currently work for a company called Client First Technology. So, even when I'm going to show you today, I'll caveat what parts actually work in GCC and DoD because I'm big. I work with that all day, and when you're in conferences, the first question you get is like, "Does that work in GCC?" I'll try to answer that for folks. But I've been working in the Power BI space, like Power Pivot, Power BI for well over 10 years now. And I started out in SharePoint, and somebody was like, "Hey, can we put some reports together?" And I was like, "Oh, okay. Well, what's this Power Pivot for SharePoint?" And then started working with Power Pivot, and then Power BI came out, and it's been Power BI pretty much every day since, and doing a lot of data engineering, leading teams on implementing large scale, medium sized scale Power BI related projects. So a lot of what I'm going to talk about today is kind of born out of those hard projects where I drank too much Red Bull and probably ate too much bad food, and tried to build some frameworks or patterns in place so that you can actually have your weekends or have folks go on vacation and not worry.
You know when it becomes a good coding session if some kind of energy drink gets involved.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah,
I
thankfully I haven't
yeah,
had a Red
go
Bull in
ahead.
a while. So, but plenty of coffee.
I still like I think there's fewer and fewer of us that remember like the SharePoint Power Pivot integrate because they you could even schedule a refresh I think with those files in SharePoint back in the day, right? Like the model
Yeah.
could auto refresh the equivalent, opening and clicking the refresh button to actually refresh the Power Pivot model before they had Power BI and all that. And there was like an embedded version you could see of it where you could actually interact and and all that. But it was the OG kind of online Power BI back in the day.
Yep. And came with Silverlight, which I mean that tells you how far back it went.
It was pretty, but like it was so slow. It was worse than Flash. It was really bad.
Yep. Well, they had that nice little gallery where you could see all your reports and the tabs for the reports, but it took like, several minutes for some pages to load. And then you could click on it and then you'd wait another like minute for the page to load. So I'm much happier with the Power BI embedded in SharePoint experience now.
I remember the spinning wheel very well. It always looked like a foxtail chasing itself to me, but like you have to stare at that for a very long time for the pages to load.
Hmm. I could tell you it was
Exactly.
fun doing demos with execs. I'd always have to make sure my tabs already had them kind of preloaded because just sitting there waiting
Yep.
never.
Exactly. I would open like four versions of the same Excel file and just have each of the tabs already pre-rendered and just switch between the
Exactly.
files. Yep. Yep.
Yeah, there's
Oh,
there's nothing
I
worse
get the
than
pain
those
for
like
that.
yeah, it's nothing worse than those awkward pauses as you're waiting for your demo to show up. So hopefully we don't have any of
Hmm.
those today.
But on the topic of testing patterns and some of the stuff that we'll be getting into, where would you like to start on that conversation?
Well, so I think the biggest kind of breakthrough that we've had, and I know there's been other folks on who have demonstrated, it's the DAX Query View feature
Hmm.
in Power BI has really kind of opened up the ability to do testing. And I can show you on the slides kind of what I wanted to cover today. Don't need
Okay.
to talk about myself, but really maybe where we start is why would you test in Power BI? and then talk a little bit about the patterns that we have with whether you're using PBIX, PBIP, or we have time today to even show you the continuous integration pattern that has emerged now, since we can use that with the Fabric APIs that have come out in the commercial sector. Right. So, Reed, you probably know this, but why do we test? Well, the number one thing is you want to try to find those errors before the customers do. There's nothing worse than getting that phone call on a Monday morning and saying, oh, that slicer's broken, or that number doesn't look good, or hey, that data seems a little old. Those are never a good start to the work week. And then the other one is, let's say you had that error in production and you tell your client you fixed it, or you tell your boss you fixed it, and then like a week later or even a day later, it's back there again. You definitely lose trust in the folks that you're working with if they keep seeing the same issue in production again. And then the one that I always tell in teams is tests are your safety net. There's nothing worse for a newer developer, or even if you're starting a new project, that you get a Power BI semantic model and you get a report and somebody's like, hey, can you update this? And you're just like, I don't want to break something. And so you just kind of make a tweak and you publish and you just kind of go, I hope I didn't mess something up. And tests are there for the safety net so that you can at least make sure the errors that have been in production before don't show up again. So you're less likely to be, causing calamity in your production environment. And that's kind of culminates to this is a non-commercial plug for the concept of DataOps. And so when I was working on large projects, we would have these issues where somebody would make a tweak to Power Query or somebody make a tweak to a visual, and we didn't realize we were causing a regression error. We're introducing another issue. And I was always looking for a new philosophy or a new paradigm to like, okay, how can we do this better? And came across DataOps, which was kind of born out of Chris Berg and his colleagues kind of came up with these principles that adopted some of the best practices across industry. So I got a QR code on a video on it. I could always talk forever on DataOps, but that's kind of where testing, or the concept of testing for me, kind of came out, was looking at DataOps and stressing that you should be testing your Power BI reports and your semantic models.
And I think I'm very adamant, as you mentioned, to keep things out of production. I think it also marries very well to that idea that Microsoft's been pushing with Fabric of the bronze, silver, and gold layers, where the silver ideally should be splitting your good and your bad data, not only to keep it out of production, but also like so you can know if and when and how much bad data you have, and then be able to a degree analyze it to fix it and then get production up and running again, but without any issues happening in that final environment.
Yeah, exactly. I could tell you, when you have one of the most impactful things I've ever had is, even if you see an error in production, you like call the customer before they even know and say, hey, we noticed an issue, we'll fix it, and it should be within an X amount of time, and I'll call you back as soon as we fix it. And that gives them peace of mind that like, okay, this person's got and this team's got their act together. They know what they're doing.
Exactly. I'm putting the link that the QR code link directly into the chat as well for the video.
So should we get into some of the patterns? Maybe get out of slides.
Absolutely.
Okay. So I did put another QR code up there for the DAX Query View testing patterns. This goes to the README file that I have. All the content that I'm going to show today is on that GitHub site. It's under MIT license. You're free to download it. I am going to put that caveat there that if you bring it into your own commercial environment, follow your security policy. So that's just coming from the GCC and DoD tenant background. Like, don't bring code in that you haven't had somebody look in, or make sure your policy is good to go.
Exactly.
All right. So the first pattern that we're going to cover today for testing is the PBIX pattern, and this is kind of the easy into the DAX Query View testing pattern. because all you need is the recent release of Power BI Desktop. I think DAX Query View came out in November of last year. I think, Reed, that might have been about the time frame it was announced.
Approximately a year ago, yeah.
Yeah, and then it was GA sometime early summer. So if you've got a recent release of Power BI Desktop, it actually is already enabled because it went generally available. And it looks something like this. So I've got a Power BI report that I've used for a lot of my demonstrations. It's probably not going to win a lot of awards for visualizations, but this is really for demo purposes. In Power BI Desktop, you have this new DAX Query View. And a lot of the cool features with DAX Query View is you get the ability to write your DAX code and save it with the Power BI file. And so when this came about, our teams were talking like, hey, we can finally kind of couple our tests or even have kind of like working areas and still save that to the Power BI file, the PBX file, and share that with the team, whether that we were using OneDrive, using Git, we could still share those tests. And we have kind of a standard way that we do testing. And that involves kind of coming up with a schema so that any DAX query that you write always got to output some sort of tabular data. And what you see here in the DAX Query View is a set of tabs, and each tab has its own DAX, and you can hit the run button and it'll run the DAX there. And one of the things that we try to make sure that we do for any one of these test cases is we'll copy what we have here as the sample test file. So what we try to do is every file that we have that's a test will end in tests or TEST. And that'll come into play later when we look at another pattern. And it also helps us kind of differentiate between what's our working area, maybe we're trying something out, and what's actually a legitimate test that we want to use. And within the file, you'll see we actually are generating a table ourselves. So the nice thing about DAX is you can create tables on the fly. So what we do is we'll union a row, and that row contains a test name, the expected value, the actual value, and then at the very end, we'll use a little DAX magic and just compare the two values to see whether or not they passed.
Right.
This is like a simple example. We're comparing 1 to 1, and you could see that they all end up being true. But we'll copy this over for the different types of tests that we want to build. And the types of tests that you can build vary, but one of the ones that we try to do first is measures. So anytime we're building a measure, we're writing DAX, that's code that we should be testing. And we try to I think the best example is we try to time bound it. Maybe it's a fiscal year time bound. So if you're doing some sort of like profit calculation, if your data has 2-year-old data or even 1-year-old data that you're going to know is static, you can add filters to that measure. And if the number should be 1 million for that prior fiscal year, and your measure is saying 1 million, you're good. If it doesn't, that either means two things. You've updated the DAX measure and now you've kind of broken it to not calculate correctly, or the underlying data's changed, which we can test for as well. Yep. And so that kind of gives you a peace of mind that anytime you make a change to the DAX measure, you're less likely to be introducing regression errors. Yep. So, and for me, I'm not really great at DAX writing. I would say I'm pretty good. And that's just because I failed a lot over the last couple of years trying to write DAX, or I've watched a lot of DAX related videos, whether it's yours or Marco Russo's or any of the other ones that are out there that go over DAX. But one of the awesome things about DAX Query View is it's integrated with the performance analyzer. So when we have teams who want to develop calculations or measure tests, what we do is we usually just create a new tab. Maybe we'll hide it in the model and create a KPI card, or even I'm sorry, just a card visual. And I'll show you, I've got a measure here that maybe I want to test. And right now it says, 17,000, but I can add some filters to it. So maybe I want to filter it under certain conditions. And I can even give it a date range. So maybe I just want to filter it for a certain period of time, like that. And
Now, there's one thing that I do wish that I love the integration of being able to build out and pop into the query view, but wouldn't it be great if you could have the filter pane built into the DAX Query View? So
so it would generate it on the floor. That would be pretty cool.
Well, because I find that one of my most annoying things is to unless I'm copy and pasting the code, via the performance analyzer, it's sometimes hard to like remember what part of the query to add the filters in to mirror the environments. And if you could just have a filter pane where you could just quickly throw on a couple of page filters onto the query like you would on a visual to reproduce your environment, I feel like that would make it would reduce the friction of people learning the query view if you had that similar experience. So it's an idea that I've voted on a wish list, that having this filter pane in the query view for query level filters, I think would be fantastic.
I mean, I would vote for that. I think it also would teach people DAX a little bit better, because I found that when I used Performance Analyzer, I had a better understanding of the DAX based on just seeing how it gets rendered in different visuals and how grouping happens and how filtering happens. I had a better appreciation of what was happening under the hood, and I could actually write DAX a little bit better because of it.
Exactly.
So I talked about Performance Analyzer. So you do have to turn it on. So if you go to the View tab and then select Performance Analyzer, and I can hit Start Recording and just refresh the visual in this page, it will actually have the card visual. And then I can actually run that DAX query in DAX Query View. And what it's going to do is open up a new tab for you. And you can see it's automatically shows you how it sets up the filters and then how it actually produces the result. And what we'll do then is just copy this over to our test cases. So in between the define area, we'll just paste that in there. And we might clean up the names here. But for the demo, I'm not going to change that. I'll just set that, instead of it evaluate, I'll have it set to the actual variable. And then I'll do the measure test. And let's see what the actual value is. I'll just replace that. And when I run it, you'll see now it's false because it's comparing 1 to the 1403. And I'll just hard code that. And if you can even get fancier later, you can actually, this can not just be hard coded, this could be another calculation that you compare it to. And now when I run it, those tests pass. So that's like the one kind of way we do testing, is we'll set up measures, and especially if we have an error that shows up, we'll test for that certain situation, copy the DAX, put it in the test, and then that way, anytime we're making updates to the model, we can just run this measures test and make sure we didn't break anything, which is nice. And that's avoided a lot of issues where I don't know if this is something that anybody who's watching this has come through, but I'm in the Power Query window here. How many of you have ever like troubleshooted something where you add a filter, you're troubleshooting it, and then you're like, oh, I fixed the issue and maybe the filter's up here somewhere. I'll put it back down here. And you just close and kind of forget that the filter's there. I've done that plenty of times. I know a lot of folks that as you're troubleshooting Power Query, you add the filter and you forget about it. Well, the test at least will tell you like, hey, that calculation's off. Well, maybe because the table doesn't have all the rows of data you needed anymore.
That's why I was very happy when they finally, in Power BI, added the discard changes button for Power Query that had been around since day one in Power Query for Excel, but Power BI had like for years did not have that. And I'm sure you've done this too. So many times you have to close the file and reopen it because you don't actually remember. Like it's easier for
Yep.
you to maybe redo a couple steps that you know you did than to try to figure out, oh, where on earth is that change that I made that I have to go find now that I forgot about?
Yeah, I mean, we'll have like code development sessions where we're working on something, and then we're like, okay, I think we figured it out. And then it's like, all right, let's close everything, don't save it, open it back up, and then we'll make the changes just to make sure we didn't like inadvertently add some other steps that we didn't, we're going to miss.
Exactly.
So not only can we test the measures, but we can also test kind of the content of the tables, which I found really cool with DAX Query View. So for example, if I go back to the DAX Query View up at the right, if you right click on any of these tables, you have this quick queries, and they have a column statistics, which I've really liked because it does a lot of the statistical kind of DAX that I would normally have to write myself and make mistakes on. But some of the things that we'll add tests for is that column that we think should be distinct, does it actually have distinct values? Or does that column that we have, it shouldn't have any null values in it, does it have any nulls in it? And this is very easy to like make mistakes on in Power Query, where you'll make one change, or maybe you were doing an inner join and then you do a left outer join, and then you forgot that that has blanks in it. And now you've got blanks in that table that isn't supposed to be there for that column. And what you can do then is just like, let's say the null count here, I want to be 0. I've got a sample here that we just copy that DAX over. Actually, it's in table tests here. So we'll do a count. Date ID has no nulls. Distinct IDs have distinct values. So we'll count the rows and then count the distinct count no blanks, and just see if we're in good shape there. So the statistics that you can get out of here can be converted to tests, which is really nice. And just to kind of illustrate the point, I can just copy this, the null count for, let's say, this table, or I'm sorry, this alignment key, go back to my sample tests, just add this as test 2, and put this here. When I run it, I had an error somewhere. Oh, there's that extraneous comma.
It's always the commas.
It's always the commas. And now I've got a test that makes sure that there's no nulls in alignment key, which is really nice. So not only can I test measures, but I can start testing the tables and the columns and their scheme, their content, which is really helpful when you want to make sure that that one column, it should never be blank, doesn't have blanks, and it has distinct values. Maybe you accidentally remove that remove duplicate step. So there's those little things that you might do in Power Query that you don't realize have introduced regression errors, and you can test for that, which we use, especially if we know we've moved something to production, we had an error. The first thing we'll think about is like, what kind of test can we write? And that's some of the philosophy that we try to have. You don't just write tests for test's sake. You write tests to maybe resolve an issue that you noticed in the test environment or you have in the production environment. And then slowly over time, you'll build a nice suite of tests to be able to validate the model. So there's one other test, which set of tests that I found really helpful, and it's with the introduction of the info function in DAX. I don't know how much you've worked with that, Reed, but I've
honestly never used that one. Yeah.
Yeah. So what you can do now is actually get a basically a schema of the table you're pointing to. So you can get what the columns are, what the column types are, and the names of the columns, and compare it to like a static version of that table. Now, why would you want to do that? So what's the biggest problem you run into, Reed, if you rename a measure?
Depending on how it's, better said, where it's renamed, its dependencies can often break.
Yep. And then the broken visual, which is the other one. Get that.
Yeah, exactly. The one that I'd say is the trickiest, just as I mentioned, is sometimes you can have I've found that if you have a measure as a visual of a filter, if the measure breaks, it doesn't actually always break the visual. The filter stops being applied, but
Yep.
like a column-based filter will break it. Like if you have product category equals bikes, the visual will break if that column goes away. But if a measure is like something equals 1 because it's like a dynamic filter, if that breaks, if you open the filter pane, the measure will actually have an error icon, but the visual it still renders without that filter anymore.
So you don't even
it's
know.
kind of a very it's a very hidden one for that one.
That's a good point. The other one that gets me is if you like accidentally change a type. So let's say you convert it from a text to an integer, and that column is used in a relationship, and then you update your Power Query, and maybe that casting from the text to the integer went away accidentally, and you have that relationship between a text-based column and an integer column, and then all of a sudden you get these weird behaviors when you're doing filtering, and it takes you forever to try to figure out, like, oh, this column is now a text and it was an integer, and I should have 2 integers being in the relationship. You can test for that. You can say, like, hey, it was expected to be an integer and now it's a text. Something's wrong.
Yep, exactly.
And so the test that I have here, what it does is it generates this big schema of the test. And at the very top, I've kind of defined the 2 tables I want to do a test case on. And the rest of this DAX is just to build the schema. And then I compare it to a static schema. So this is the schema for the alignment dimension, and this is the schema for the Marvel fact dimension. And then when I run this, what it's going to do is do a comparison of the schema where you can actually test to see if it's like a subset, or you can actually test to see if it's an exact map. Because you have the schema represented as a table, you can do a diff and see, like, is there any differences? Does it match completely? Is it a subset of the match? And then it can tell you if you broke something, which we'll use after we deploy a model to production. We'll like take that snapshot of that schema and put it in. And so if this test fails, either it was intentional that we were changing the schema, or we accidentally made a change to the schema and we need to fix whatever we broke, whether that was in Power Query or the measure rename. And this is super helpful, especially if you're separating your semantic model from your reports, because not every time you're going to know that you might be breaking a downstream report. This local test in your semantic model will at least tell you. And one of the things that, if you're looking at this, I can't imagine you want to write this code to represent kind of the static schema. So we, in the model that I share on GitHub, we actually have kind of a DAX, writing DAX. So you can give it the name of the table, and that's like right here. So this is the fact table. When I run this, I selected it. When I run this, it actually will generate the DAX. So I can just copy this over to the schema test here and just replace what I had before, which is really nice. So that way it's a little easier to kind of move the schemas over and then check the schemas and still keep it in the Power BI model. And that's the one thing I don't think I kind of emphasize is, like, all these tabs stay with the PBIX file. So when you're sharing these, like, these are the tests that come along with it. So if somebody else opens it up, they can run these tests too. And so when our team is in the process of deploying stuff, what we'll tell them to do is, like, all right, if you're using this pattern, go ahead and make sure you run the tests on each one of the tabs and make sure nothing's broken. And that gives them peace of mind that like, hey, I didn't accidentally break something as I was making updates to the model, which is really nice.
I agree.
So with that kind of schema in place, what we tend to do is just make sure that we kind of stick to the schema, and we make sure that our naming convention always has a .test in it. And then we try to separate our tests over time, where we'll have our measure tests, our column tests, our table tests, and our schema tests. And that kind of builds our safety net for a semantic model. And it's one of those where like maybe it's a little arduous up front to start building those tests, but it's like that 6 months down the road where somebody else is making an update and they see a failed test, and you're like, oh, that would have been really bad if that went to production. And so it's one of those like, no news is good news in production. We didn't introduce an error, and it just kind of shows the benefit of testing. Now, there is like another pattern that you can take with this. So if you take this kind of pattern and then kind of switch it from PBIX to PBIP, you can even take it further. So if you have the recent release of Power BI Desktop, I'm going to show you that if you have PBIP format, Visual Studio Code, and PowerShell Core, you can actually start automating some of these testing locally. And this is kind of the pattern that you can even use in GCC and DoD, because PBIP is for the most part available with the desktop mode, and definitely available in commercial. So I know for some of you, if you're watching this, especially if you come from like a development background, or you're dealing with a very big model, like the process of clicking through all these every time you want to run a test is still kind of prone to error, because maybe you miss the tab and you didn't run it.
Yep.
And you forget it. Well, if let me switch over to a different version of this Power BI model. So I've saved it as a PBIP, and just to make sure, full disclosure here, that's a preview feature that you can turn on. And when it decides to open up for me, you just have to click this box, and it'll let you have to make sure you close it if it's the first time checking it, and then open it back up. And when you have it in PBIP mode, what it's actually going to do is save it as text files. And I know you've had Rui on in the team explain this, so I don't want to like belabor what PBIP can do. But one of the nice things about DAX Query View in the PBIP mode is each one of these tabs is saved as an individual file.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
That makes this so that we can actually start looking at automating it. So I've opened this up in Visual Studio Code and just opened the folder up that has the PBIP with the semantic model folder and the report folder. And our teams worked on a free PowerShell gallery library. It's called Invoke DQV Testing. We've got it out there, free to download, and I'll show you how to install it. You just need to make sure you have PowerShell Core. And when you have that installed, I could show you what the install looks like. That's just the typical PowerShell install, invoke DQV testing. And if you're not an admin, you can just do scope current user. And once that's installed, you can just run this command. As long as you have the Power BI file open, what it's going to do is look for all the DAX query files that end in .test or .tests and run the tests automatically. So what our teams will do is we make an update and we'll open up Visual Studio Code, and you can see here what it's doing is it's going to attempt to run it for sample model because I have it open, and then it will tell you what each individual tab it's running right here. So this one's running the column test, and that's the test that it ran and it passed. And then you could see for this test, this one failed. And at the very bottom, it'll give you a run through of what the results are. So you had 15 pass, one failed, you had a total of 16 runs. So instead of having to click on every single one of the tabs, we can just run the test, and then I know that that test failed, and I can see, oh, it's that one. And I deliberately added that test in there. But you can see, okay, I need to fix that now. And it saves time. Folks, before we kind of commit our PBIP file to the repo, or even before we do a publish, we kind of say, hey, run invoke DQV testing and run the tests. And we've also set this up that I know what it's doing behind the scenes is it's looking for the localhost port for that sample model, and then issuing the DAX queries to it directly. And it's using the invoke AS command that's part of analysis services. So this actually also works with RLS. So it's not like doing any REST API calls to issue DAX queries, which doesn't work with RLS. This one does, which is nice. So if you got an RLS data set and you still want to run tests on the schema on that, you can do that with this library. So that's kind of that pattern, because what it really helps us do is set ourselves up that we don't have to click on every tab. We've built our suite of tests. They stay with the file, and we can quickly understand what has failed or if everything's good before we publish to the next workspace. And what we've done to kind of build on that pattern is introduce a continuous integration pattern. And this is where we kind of leave the GCC and DoD folks to wait, because it's not in those regions yet. But this is strictly in the commercial sense, because the Fabric APIs are available. And so what this will do in terms of prerequisites is you got to have something like Azure DevOps, or the example I'm going to give you is in Azure DevOps. You can do this in GitHub Actions, and you'll need XMLA and service principles to do that, because now what you're doing is taking the testing and automating it. So you're going to need some sort of service principle to do that. And you just need a premium back capacity. You don't necessarily need Fabric, you just need a premium back capacity. So I've tested this with PPU, premium, and Fabric capacities, and this process will work. I've also tested this with not a service principal. So I've had like a PPU licensed user account, which is not always recommended, but you can do that if you have MFA or multi-factor authentication turned off for that account. And worked it with PPU, and it works. And so what it kind of does in a high level is you take the PBIP file, you commit it to Azure DevOps, and then you have a pipeline that runs kind of 4 steps. It will publish the semantic model changes to a workspace of your choosing. It then publishes the reports, because the model has to be there before the reports. And then it will validate the content by testing the refresh. So even before it starts looking at the test that we've kind of built for the model, it validates, can it actually refresh the data? Is there an issue? Did somebody accidentally like pull in an Excel file on their local machine? And we need to move that to SharePoint. Like there's all those kind of things. Or did we not register a gateway to do that refresh? Those are what step 3 is going to do, and make sure that that's valid. And then it will also then, once it's validated that, for each of the semantic models that have changed, it will run that same invoke DQV testing function, but instead of it like looking at the local port, it will look at the workspace connection, which is why you need premium to issue those DAX queries and tell you what the results are. Does that make sense?
It does, yes, absolutely. And yeah. I appreciate the diagram. Anything that helps to show a little bit of the process flow.
Yeah, no problem. I'm not as a visual guru as you, but I try my best. This is PowerPoint at my height.
PowerPoint is honestly like one of the best photo editors. My thumbnails for each of these YouTube live streams that I do is made in PowerPoint. I have my assets, I rearrange them, I put the text on there, and I add the icons, and there you go.
All right, so I don't feel as bad now. PowerPoint's like my go-to. I have a bunch of PowerPoint files that are just images of different visuals that I've had to put together for reports and publications. All right, so what does that look like in practice? So I've got a repository in Azure DevOps. And for those who've never worked with Azure DevOps and are looking to use it or try this out, what's nice about it is for your tenant or your personal account, you can set up Azure DevOps, and the first 4 licenses are free. So I've got a lot of folks who I've worked with in the past. It's like, just spin it up, you have your own playground, and you're not incurring any cost, which is really nice. So I've got the repository here that is storing the sample model that I have, and I've created an Azure DevOps pipeline, and I'll crack open the lovely YAML code here in a second. But every time I make an update, when it runs, if I have any errors, it actually just displays this on the screen. And so you can also set it up where it emails you if you have an error. So if I'm like a project manager and I've got a pipeline set up and I want to know before I move it to test, hey, are there any failures happening? I'll get emails to see if like myself or any of the team I'm working with has introduced errors into the model, because it automatically tests it. And you can set it up where like anytime you make a change, it runs the tests. You can have it, like in this case, I have it every 6 hours to run like a full suite of tests and make sure nothing's wrong with the model. And I'll click into the job a little bit further here. So what it's going to do is that the same types of tests that you saw in Visual Studio Code are running here, and it just outputs it to the console. And so that way you can kind of have these tests running in the background. Every time you make a change, you can see what tests are failing, and maybe this is going to your development workspace and test failing is okay, but at least you know the tests have failed, so that before you move it to your test environment or your production environment, you need to fix this issue, which is really helpful to know, especially if you're making a lot of changes. And it's okay to make changes and get it to dev. You'll know if you failed and be able to resolve those hopefully very quickly.
Now,
You want to see
curiously, with some of the data being written here, I'm guessing like this type of information can, if stored in a table, could in theory be fed back into, say, Power BI goals or something else like that as well. So you could actually get like, I mean, this can also notify you, but there's multiple ways to have automatic notifications or alerts for individuals to go check some of this stuff. Because I've certainly built that with the semantic link and a few others from a data perspective, from the data coming out of a database, but like you can't really do any of those at the measure level because the measures are, post obviously refresh.
Yeah, so I don't necessarily have time today to go over this pattern because I wanted to cover this one, but I've got a pattern that after it's done doing the tests, it will package those tests up and then move it to OneLake. So then you could, all those test results are now sitting in a lake house that you could theoretically have your own Power BI report that is monitoring how well your environment's working in terms of testing, or your development team's doing testing. And that's like one thing in DataOps that they definitely stress is, we spend all our time building Power BI reports that are measuring how well an organization's processes are doing. Why aren't you eating your own dog food and doing the same thing for your own development team? Like, are you measuring how well your testing's going and how well you are in terms of deployments? And by copying this data to OneLake, it's just as easy to build a direct lake or set up Python scripts that builds a star schema that shows you how well your tests are going by semantic model, by branch, and by committer. So you can see, like, is there any person that you need to have some kind of training to, hey, you got a lot of errors, or you're introducing a lot of errors. Let's get you trained up and make sure you're building things correctly.
Exactly.
So this is the lovely YAML file that you can copy and paste and set up. I have instructions on how to set it all up, but I do want to have a bit of a shout out. So Rui Romano's got a kind of a Fabric PowerShell wrapper that is kind of critical to doing this. I know at some point, maybe Microsoft's going to have their own kind of Fabric management PowerShell module, like they do for the kind of the classic Power BI REST APIs. But this one takes care of a lot of kind of the nuances on moving all those PBIP files into the workspace. And so I take that library that he has out there, And what this is going to do is kind of authenticate with that service principal to the REST API. And I can kind of zoom in. This might be a little more codey than most folks are interested in, but there's some kind of key features here that we introduced using Git. Is we can actually test on like what's changed in the last 2, 3, 20 different commits. So this way, if you're trying to get your testing out quicker and you only want to test what's changed, this kind of code will does just a git diff just to make sure that like, oh, these are the only files that have changed. So these are the ones that we need to move, as opposed to like moving every single file into the workspace, which can take some time, especially if you're testing your refreshes. And then what it will do is do the promotion, and it does this import fabric item, which is the library that Rui's worked on. And then it will go through the reports, and it actually will go through the reports and update the connection. So under the hood, when you're working with a Power BI report, there's a connection file that tells it that it's connecting to that semantic model locally on your desktop. Well, when you move this to the cloud, you need to tell that report, hey, connect to this semantic model in this workspace. And that's what a lot of this code does, is just tries to figure out what it needs to update in order to know, connect everything together. And then finally, it runs the refresh test, and then the test results kind of get outputted here. And it either writes that to Azure DevOps, so you can see that in your pipeline, or it copies it to OneLake using the AZ copy method, which is pretty cool. That line of code can move your test results to OneLake, and you can process that downstream if you wanted to. Yeah, so those are the 3 patterns that we're using right now with DAX Query View, and thankfully DAX Query View lets us write those tests, or has laid the foundation for us to be able to use tests. And when I work with teams, sometimes we'll start out just with the PBIX pattern and just start building our tests there and kind of keep them collected. And then when we can start using PBIP with Git, we'll switch over to that as we get a little bit bigger, and then we'll take that next step. If we're successful and we're producing a lot of semantic models and reports, we'll switch over to the CI pattern for deployments. And so that way we can kind of grow, not have to worry that somebody takes a vacation, somebody else can make an update to the semantic model, and at least the existing tests are run, and that person doesn't have to get a phone call saying, hey, we broke something, can you help us fix it?
I just love the versatility that you provided for this, is like the leveraging other platforms such as VS Code, integrations obviously with PBIP, the fact that the files get saved as DAX files, but there's a lot of options for scalability and automation, as you've mentioned, versus just the manual testing. But at that very minimum, I love the fact that, kind of as you pointed out, the evolution of, being able to go from those hidden pages that you have in a Power BI desktop file to, like, you can actually have all your notes and testing and other stuff saved, but like in the actual query view itself, kind of further behind the curtain, rather than those artificial hidden pages that are stored in the file itself as a report page.
Yeah, I can tell you, I think my personal best in that is I've had like 40 in a semantic model, all those hidden tabs. Just because you had. I'm
hoping someday maybe we could get like groups or something for those, being able to like organize them. Because the other downside with that is not only save tabs for that, but I think one downside of tooltip pages, report page tooltips, which are super useful, but like if you have 10 main pages and 2 or 3 visuals per page where you maybe want to have one of those, that could could be dozens of extra pages, and it just sucks to have such a long list. You do have that one hidden feature where if you right click on the page navigation, you get the list.
Oh, no, I didn't.
Yeah, no. So go over to desktop. Oh, here you go, this one. So on the page navigation itself, the 2 little arrows, the left and right arrow.
Yeah.
Right click on that.
Oh.
Yeah.
Well, you just made my day. For my larger
there you go.
ones now, I'm going to use that.
Oh yeah. And it has a scroll bar if it gets big enough where you can scroll and find the page. It's a little hidden feature in there. If I actually recall, it was something that almost came as part of the not the UI package, but it was the code base that came with this, that it was added in there as kind of like an afterthought, but it ended up becoming like a hidden, very liked feature for large pages. It's only available in desktop. You can't do that in the service, but it's really nice if you need to find a page very far over.
Oh, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Learned something. Thank you. Now I'm going to use that.
Absolutely.
Oh,
any resources?
I hope they do that with DAX too. Oh, it's there. Is it there?
Is it?
No.
No. Okay. It's not in. Okay. Yeah. So he was just checking the DAX Query View, but it looks like it doesn't have it on the same page navigation there. They got rid of it, sadly. But as we're wrapping up, for resources links, from either yourself on any supplementary videos, articles, or anywhere else they can go to kind of start using some of this or further education or learning, what would you recommend as some places to check out that I can drop into the chat?
So I do have my blog that covers a lot of like these techniques. Let me just post that.
That should be.
Yep. And then I do have a YouTube channel that kind of covers how to set this up. Some videos. I'm not as prolific as the number of videos you put with also the nice content as well. But I try to do my best just to kind of record some of the videos I do to set up the pipelines and set up the Visual Studio Code and how to install and get everything set up. And then the other resources I would recommend is if you see anything related to DAX Query View, whether that's like some of the MVPs who have been talking about it, those are videos to watch. I think got Kevin Arnold has some presentations on DAX Query View. I think even Mike Carlos had some of the Microsoft staff showing DAX Query View, which is awesome. So you kind of learn how to use that. And then any post that you're going to see for like Power BI Dev Mode from Rui probably is going to have a component here to learn testing, how to integrate, continuous integration, and how to automate a lot of your steps.
And there's a few videos that I've had with, at least a few. I know if you, I dropped both Kevin's and yours link in the description, and I think if you just look for Query View, there 2 or 3 live streams should at least be covering that in mind. You're upwards of my 140th, 150th that I've done.
Nice.
Yeah, had a few over the years.
Yeah.
But no, I think in general it's super useful feature, and they're continuing to, every few months I think there's new updates that are coming out as they're getting feedback. So also just as a recommendation, always check out I'll post a link to this, the Fabric Ideas from Microsoft, because they're especially with a product as new as this, which is Query View. It's fully out. It's not a preview anymore, right?
No, it's
sometimes
GA.
I forget which is it. Yeah, it's GA. So, but it's still new enough that they are adding little, continuous tweaks. They're making it more VS Code like as it's been evolving. So those are the kind of things that will be that I think they monitor closely, the ideas. So I'd highly recommend, just if you ever have any, either vote with your vote on any ideas that already exist, or feel free to put new ones in there. But that does continue to help the product grow for sure.
Yeah, and I've definitely even seen it from November. The integration in the UI has gotten much better, like moving tabs, some of the quick queries, some of the other options that are available now make it a lot easier just to generate DAX, so you can kind of understand the model you're working with.
And we didn't even get into the Copilot part of it, which is nice, but still does it still require the F64?
It does. It does. I
cry in money bags.
Yeah, I do have on, if you do look at DAX Query View, I do have a set of like testing prompts. I'll post the link that you can use if you're interested. So we've got a couple of these. They've upgraded the amount of text that you can paste now. So I've kind of had some bootstrap
Nice.
ones that if you want to generate the test, this kind of helps generate some of the original tests. So it's pretty cool. It's getting there. I'll be happy when I've got full access, and I know it's GA, especially for some of my customers who don't have it turned on just yet, but it will save some time, especially for building some of the tests that we have.
Nice, perfect. I'll make sure to include that as well. Alexa, let me switch back here then. But no, this has been fantastic, and I think I enjoyed seeing some of the enterprise integrations and scale that we can, it's what can you do with that tool besides just use it in isolation? How can it pair well with Alexa? Heard me for some reason. I never understand sometimes when Siri and Alexa just randomly hear stuff. Alexa, cancel. Yeah, there you go. She was asking me for an additional prompt for some reason. It's one of those is like, no, they don't start listening when you talk to them. They're always listening in the background.
Yes, they are.
But yeah, this overall, fantastic. I like the being able to have marriages, I think, between simple and complex, and certainly showing people where they can automate. End of the day, if we can save time and money, like that's what we all would like to be able to have with our jobs or our companies. So I think you provided some good use cases for that for sure. And I'd love to have you back on at some point. So with any of my guests, feel free to always drop any mentions of some new talks or anything else that you have as some ideas. And I'd love to get you back on sometime in the future.
Oh, I appreciate it. And I do want to mention one thing is, Reed, I attended one of your pre-cons on reports back a couple years ago. Still to this day, the content you had is awesome. Like the reports that we built are only successful because of the kind of the best practices you put into place. So appreciate you contributing.
Absolutely. Well, thank you. Hopefully at least some of the knowledge that I have is useful for others. And it seems like a lot of those tidbits have been, with reporting at least, has gone a long way. So thank you. But with that, I will wish you a good rest of your Friday as well. Everyone, thanks for tuning in today. And then otherwise, have a great weekend, and I'll see people online next week.
Thanks, Reed.
All right. Cheers. Thank you so much for watching. Please consider hitting that like and subscribe button. And if you want to help support this channel, take a look at our channel memberships or our merchandise store for cool swag. And last but not least, please consider sharing this video on your social media platform of choice to help our channel grow. So, until next time.